1842, Louisiana, the Caldwell Plantation. The photograph was never supposed to exist. When floodwaters pulled down the old oak trees of Caldwell Plantation, they uncovered a rusted tin box inside. A glass plate photograph of two identical boys standing before the burned mansion. Same eyes, same scar. But history only recorded one heir. The archivist who handled the photo in 1912 wrote a single note before sealing it away again. If this is a trick of the camera, it fooled the house itself. Locals in Street Landry Parish still whisper that the Caldwell family built their fortune on a mirror made of flesh. One boy born free, the other born to serve him. Louisiana, 1842, a night thick with thunder and humidity. Inside the plantation house, a child lies delirious with fever, his skin pale, his breath shallow. Down in the slave quarters, another boy, his skin the same pale tone, watches lightning flash across the windows. He does not yet know that by sunrise, he will be ordered to replace a dying child. Before we descend into that house, I want to ask you something. If a lie saves a family's name, but destroys a life, is it still a sin? Tell me what you think before we begin. Thunder crawled across the Louisiana sky as the doctor's carriage rolled through the flooded dirt road. The wheels sank deep into the mud, groaning with every turn. Inside, Dr. Everett Klein pressed a handkerchief to his nose. The air was thick with rot and rain. When he reached the Caldwell Plantation, the lamps were already burning in every window, their flames trembling like trapped souls. A maid met him at the door, her dress soaked, her hands trembling. "It's the boy, sir. He's been burning all night. The mistress says he's seeing shapes." Dr. Klein nodded. He had been here before years ago, when the master's first wife died giving birth. The new mistress, Eleanor Caldwell, was known for her strict manners and her refusal to step outside during daylight. He followed the maid upstairs. Each stair creaked like a voice warning him to turn back. In the bedroom, the air was heavy with camphor and fever. The child lay on white sheets, eyes glazed, whispering something over and over, a name the doctor couldn't catch. At his bedside sat Mr. Caldwell, the plantation owner, tall, rigid, his face carved from years of discipline. "You'll save him, doctor," Caldwell said flatly. "He's all I have left." Dr. Klein examined the boy. The fever was catastrophic, skin damp, pulse faint, pupils unreactive. It was the third such case he'd seen that month, yet none had survived. "He's weak," Klein murmured. "His lungs are failing. You must prepare for—" "No," Caldwell interrupted. "He'll live. He must live." The doctor said nothing more. He'd learned long ago that grief, in wealthy homes, sounded a lot like command. When he stepped outside the sick room, he noticed something odd. In the hallway, near the servants' quarters, a boy stood watching him. Barefoot, shirt torn, eyes bright as a storm. He looked exactly like the dying child inside. "Who are you?" the doctor asked. The boy didn't answer. He just tilted his head, as if listening to a secret only he could hear. Then the maid hurried over, grabbed the boy's arm, and whispered, "Don't let the master see you here." The boy vanished down the stairs before Dr. Klein could speak again. For a moment, the doctor thought perhaps the fever had reached him too, that he'd imagined the face. But the muddy footprints on the floor were real. That night, thunder didn't stop, and somewhere between the boy's breathing and the rain, something in that house shifted like the sound of a lock turning from the inside. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the plantation was quiet in the way a battlefield is quiet after smoke. The servants moved like ghosts, their eyes down, their steps careful, as if afraid the floorboards might listen. In the master bedroom, young Nathaniel Caldwell lay half awake, breathing in shallow bursts. His skin had taken on a waxen tone, his lips pale blue. Every few minutes, he muttered the same words, something about a mirror, a shadow, or perhaps a name. No one could tell. Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell hadn't left his side in 2 days. Her once perfect hair had come undone, streaks of grey visible against the lamplight. She spoke softly to her son, then louder, as if volume might wake him from whatever dream held him captive. "You'll open your eyes when the doctor returns," she whispered. "You'll tell me what you saw last night in your dreams. Was it your mother's face?" Mr. Caldwell watched from the doorway, silent. The doctor had already given his verdict. The boy's lungs were collapsing, the fever rising beyond reach. In the hallway, the housekeeper, a small Creole woman named Inez, stood wringing her apron. When Caldwell turned toward her, she froze. "Speak," he ordered. "It's only that. There is another child, sir," she said carefully. "Down by the laundry shed. He looks—" "Enough," Caldwell snapped. "I know who you mean." That afternoon, the doctor returned to check on Nathaniel. The boy's condition had worsened. Each breath sounded like a blade scraping glass. "He won't last the night," Klein said quietly. Caldwell didn't respond. He stared at the window where rainwater traced thin lines down the glass. Then, with a voice colder than the storm, he said, "My wife must not see him die." "Doctor," Klein hesitated. "You want me to—" "No," Caldwell interrupted. "You'll do nothing. But there's a boy in the quarters. Same age, same face. Bring him to me after dark." The doctor stared at him. "You're talking about deception, sir. That's survival," Caldwell said. "This house was built on appearances. If my son dies, the creditors will come for everything. My wife will break. The name will die with him. But if the world believes he still lives—" He let the thought hang in the air. When the doctor left that room, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just heard the devil's bargain spoken out loud. Outside, in the dim light of dusk, the same barefoot boy stood near the stables. He held a rusted toy horse in one hand, watching the doctor silently. When their eyes met, the boy asked softly, "Is he dying?" The doctor didn't answer. He simply placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, the gesture trembling with something between pity and fear. Night fell over Caldwell Plantation like a curtain drawn too tight. The lamps burned low. The insects outside had gone silent, as if the swamps themselves were holding their breath. Dr. Klein stood in the doorway of the slave quarters. Inside, a dozen faces turned toward him, tired, suspicious, resigned. The smell of smoke and damp cotton filled the air. He scanned the rows of bunks until he saw the boy again. The boy looked younger here, smaller among the others. His name, whispered by one of the women, was Samuel. "The master wants you," the doctor said quietly. Samuel didn't move. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Klein replied, though the word caught in his throat. "You're to come with me. Wash your face first." He waited as the boy splashed cold water over his skin in the wash basin. In the dim light, Samuel's features became even more uncanny. The same jawline, the same faint scar under his eye. It wasn't just resemblance. It was replication. When they reached the main house, the air felt different. Heavy, expectant. Caldwell was waiting at the top of the stairs, his expression blank. "Bring him in," he said. Samuel followed the doctor into the bedroom. The real Nathaniel lay motionless, his breathing shallow, the sound of death faint but steady. The mistress had been given laudanum to sleep. She would not wake. Caldwell approached Samuel slowly. "Do you know who he is?" Samuel nodded. "The master's son. And do you know who you are?" The boy hesitated. "A worker." Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "Tonight, you will forget that." He guided Samuel closer to the bed until the two boys were face to face. Samuel stared down at the dying child, at the reflection of himself lying still. "He's me," Samuel whispered. "He was," Caldwell corrected. Dr. Klein tried to speak. "Mr. Caldwell, this is madness. The servants will know. The wife." "The servants will remain silent," Caldwell said. "As for my wife, she'll see what she wishes to see." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver locket. Inside was a miniature portrait of Eleanor and Nathaniel, painted years ago. He hung it around Samuel's neck. "You'll answer to Nathaniel now," he said. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the old grandfather clock struck midnight, its echo rolling through the house like a final warning. Caldwell nodded to the doctor. "You may leave. From this night forward, there is only one son." Dr. Klein stepped back, heart pounding. He had treated hundreds of patients, seen death in every form, but never had he witnessed the birth of a lie so perfect, so precise, that even God might mistake it for truth. As he turned to leave, Samuel looked up and asked, "If I forget who I am, will it hurt?" The doctor didn't answer. He simply closed the door behind him. And in that silence, The substitution became history. By the following evening, the house was dressed for company. Caldwell had ordered a supper to lift spirits, though no one in the house believed it was about joy. It was about proof. The long dining table gleamed beneath a chandelier of cut glass, its candles reflecting like tiny eyes. The silver had been polished until it caught even the smallest flicker of light. Outside, the fields shimmered under a wet sunset. Thunder still grumbled far away. At the head of the table sat Eleanor Caldwell, her face powdered pale, her smile fragile as porcelain. She had been told her son's fever had broken. The laudanum haze in her mind made that easy to believe. When the door opened and Samuel entered, dressed in Nathaniel's velvet coat, his hair combed, his skin still damp from the bath, the room fell utterly silent. For a heartbeat, even the crickets outside seemed to stop. Eleanor rose slowly, pressing a hand to her chest. Her eyes widened, then softened with relief. "Nathaniel," she breathed. "My darling, you're awake." Samuel bowed his head the way he'd been told, voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, mother." The sound of that word startled him. It didn't feel false, it felt heavy, ancient, as if it belonged to someone else who had just stepped into his mouth. Eleanor embraced him, trembling. She kissed his forehead, murmuring prayers of gratitude. Behind her, the butler and maids exchanged terrified glances but said nothing. At the far end of the table, Caldwell raised a glass. "To health," he said evenly. "And to family." The guests echoed him. But Dr. Klein, seated near the edge of the table, could hardly swallow. His gaze kept flicking between the boy's calm face and the shadowy stairwell upstairs, where the real Nathaniel's body still lay cooling behind a locked door. Dinner unfolded like theatre. Samuel repeated the words Caldwell had drilled into him. "Yes, sir." "Thank you, ma'am." He mimicked the way the boy used to fold his napkin, how he laughed softly when spoken to. Only once did he falter. When a guest, a visiting judge, asked about his recovery, Samuel instinctively used a word no child of privilege would know. Quarters. The room froze for a fraction of a second. Caldwell's knife clinked against his plate. Then, with perfect poise, he smiled. "He means his quarters upstairs," Caldwell said smoothly. "He's still resting." Laughter returned, fragile and nervous. The meal ended with coffee and silence. When the guests departed, Eleanor kissed her son again, tears bright in her eyes. "You frighten me," she whispered. "Promise you won't leave me again." "I promise," Samuel said. She didn't notice how carefully he avoided using her name. Later, after the lamps were extinguished and the house sank into uneasy quiet, Dr. Klein approached Caldwell by the veranda. "You can't sustain this," he said. "The servants know. The truth will eat through these walls." Caldwell stared out at the fields, where fireflies pulsed like dying stars. "Truth," he said, "is a matter of repetition. Say a lie enough times, doctor, and even the dead start to believe it." Inside the house, Samuel stood before a mirror. He touched his reflection, the velvet sleeve, the locket on his chest, and for the first time, he wondered which face in the glass was real, the boy in the mirror, or the one who used to live in his skin. For 2 weeks, the Caldwell house performed its miracle of silence. Breakfast trays arrived and departed. Letters were written but never sent, and the chimneys burned every night, though the air was warm. To the neighbors, life seemed to have returned to normal. Inside, it had only grown stranger. Samuel, the new Nathaniel, moved through the corridors like an echo that had learned to speak. He studied the way sunlight touched the drapes, how Eleanor folded her gloves, how Caldwell's voice sharpened when speaking to servants. He repeated these rhythms until they became his own heartbeat. Yet, even the most perfect echo cannot hide forever. The first rumor began in the laundry shed, whispered between 2 young maids as they wrung linens over a wooden tub. "He calls her mother now," one said. "But last week, I heard him praying. He used the wrong name." "What name?" "His own." They fell silent when the overseer passed. But by nightfall, the story had drifted through every corner of the quarters, how the master's son had died and come back with a different voice. Down in the stables, the old groom crossed himself and muttered, "That ain't resurrection, that's replacement." Dr. Klein returned once a week, officially to check on the boy's recovery. He always found Samuel reading in the library now, pretending to enjoy the same geography books Nathaniel once favored. But when the doctor spoke to him privately, the boy's answers were sharper, heavier, touched by something that didn't belong to a child. "Do you remember being sick?" the doctor asked one afternoon. "No," Samuel said softly, "but I remember waking up different." "Different how?" "People look at me and see what they want. Maybe that's the sickness," Klein wrote in his notes later that night. Caldwell's experiment continues. The boy's mimicry is flawless, but his eyes are learning deceit faster than any adult's could. Meanwhile, Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell had begun to sense something she could not name. She swore her son's handwriting had changed. His R's looped higher, his T's fell shorter. Once, when she brushed his hair, she paused and whispered, almost to herself, "It feels thicker, coarser, like your father's." Samuel froze. He waited for her to laugh, to call herself foolish. She didn't. She only smiled faintly and said, "You must be growing into the man he wants you to be." And just like that, the lie deepened another root. Outside the mansion, the gossip reached the local parish. The young preacher, Reverend Hollis, visited the plantation under the pretext of blessing the household. He stayed for tea, prayed over the family, and as he left, he asked Dr. Klein quietly, "Tell me, doctor, is the boy truly healed, or has something else taken his place?" The doctor had no answer. That night, as he rode away through the dark cypress road, lightning flashed behind the mansion's silhouette, and for a split second, he thought he saw two figures in the upstairs window, standing side by side. Autumn crept over Louisiana early that year. The cane fields turned the color of brass, and the nights carried the faint chill of something ending. Inside the Caldwell mansion, a faint smell of smoke lingered in the hallways, not from the hearth, but from paper. It was the housekeeper, Inez, who first noticed it. She was sweeping near the library when she saw a thin curl of ash drifting out from the grate. Curiosity drew her closer. Beneath half-burned scraps of correspondence lay a fragment of fine stationery, edges blackened, but words still visible. It read, "You must never speak of the boy again. His eyes alone betray what we did. If he lives, the name will not." The handwriting was delicate, elegant, a woman's. The signature was gone, eaten by flame. Inez hesitated. Then, against every rule of her position, she hid the scrap beneath her apron and carried it down to the cellar where Dr. Klein was washing his hands. "Doctor," she whispered, "you should see this." He unfolded the charred piece and read the line 3 times before looking up. "Where did you find it?" "In the library fire." Mr. Caldwell said he was burning old ledgers. The doctor's pulse quickened. He recognized the paper-imported linen stock, used only for family correspondence. He also recognized the phrasing, "The name will not." It was how Caldwell spoke when he was afraid. Later that night, Dr. Klein searched the library under the pretext of fetching medical notes. In the desk drawer, behind the estate deeds, he found a bundle of letters tied with silk thread. Most were harmless. Invoices, thank yous, church invitations. But one envelope addressed to Mr. Caldwell, personal and private, had been slit open and resealed with new wax. Inside was a letter written nearly 10 years earlier. The ink had faded, but the words cut through the years. "You promised our secret would remain buried after she died. But the child is here, Robert. He has your eyes, your left-handedness, your stubbornness. You may call him whatever you wish, but you cannot call him mistake." The signature, M. Klein stared at it until the letters blurred. M. Mary. Margaret. None of the servants bore that name now. He realized then that Samuel's resemblance to Nathaniel was no divine accident. It was inheritance. He sealed the letter again, returned it to the drawer, and sat alone in the dark for nearly an hour, listening to the soft ticking of the clock and the sound of rain beginning outside. When he finally left, he found Samuel standing in the doorway, barefoot, eyes wide. "What are you doing here, boy?" the doctor asked, startled. "I heard the fire," Samuel whispered, "and the voices. Sometimes I think this house talks when it burns." Klein forced a thin smile. "Go to bed. If the house is lying," the boy said quietly, "shouldn't someone tell the truth?" The question followed the doctor long after Samuel disappeared down the hall. In his journal that night, he wrote one final note before locking it away. The substitution was not the beginning of deception. It was its continuation. Reverend Hollis returned to the Caldwell Plantation on a Sunday morning when the fog sat low over the cane fields. His sermons in town had lately drawn whispers about redemption, about sin hiding under silk. Perhaps it was curiosity, or guilt, that drove him back to the house he could not stop dreaming of. As he approached the gates, he saw the Caldwell flag drooping in the still air. The house looked the same, immense, proud, and faintly sick. A servant opened the door without a word. Inside, everything smelled of polish and candle wax, the perfume of control. Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell greeted him with pale cheer, her gloved hands trembling slightly. "Reverend Hollis," she said, "how kind of you to visit. Nathaniel has been asking for your prayers." She led him to the parlor, where the boy sat reading a hymnal, sunlight pooling around him like an obedient halo. He looked up, smiled politely. "Good morning, Reverend." The voice was gentle, practiced, perfect, but Hollis froze. Something in the boy's gaze, the focus, the stillness, belonged not to a child but to someone learning restraint by necessity. "Do you remember me?" Hollis asked. "Of course," the boy said. "You baptized me." Hollis nodded slowly. He had baptized Nathaniel Caldwell 6 years ago, yet this boy's left hand traced the edge of the hymn book, while his right remained still. The real Nathaniel had been right-handed. "Would you say a prayer with me, Nathaniel?" the Reverend asked. The boy nodded. They knelt together by the window. Eleanor closed her eyes, tears slipping past her lashes. Hollis began softly. "Lord, you know the names of all your children. None are lost, for every soul bears its mark." Samuel's lips moved, repeating the words, but then, almost imperceptibly, he faltered. Instead of "Father," he whispered, "Master." The Reverend's eyes opened. The word hung between them like a crack in glass. He looked toward Caldwell, who stood silently in the doorway, his hand resting on a cane. "Reverend," Caldwell said evenly, "you must forgive him. He's still recovering." The fever, Hollis echoed. "Or the guilt." The master's expression did not change. "You came to bless this house, not judge it." "Perhaps those two are the same thing," Hollis murmured. Dinner was served later, and the Reverend stayed against his better judgment. He noticed small things, the way servants avoided looking at the boy, how the mirrors in the hallways were covered with lace, how the old family portrait had been removed. After the meal, Hollis asked to walk the grounds. Caldwell allowed it, though a shadow followed him, one of the overseers, silent and watchful. By the family cemetery, the Reverend paused. Fresh soil lay over one grave, the headstone blank. No date, no name. He bent to read the faint inscription carved beneath the dust, "For the one who remains unseen." When he turned, Caldwell was there, watching. "You've seen enough," the master said. "Enough to know your house holds 2 sons." Hollis answered quietly. Caldwell's hand tightened on his cane. "Be careful what sermons you preach, Reverend. The Lord might listen too closely." That evening, as Hollis rode away through the fog, the bells of the plantation chapel tolled once, though no one had touched the rope, and from the house behind him came a single sound, faint and chilling, a boy's laughter, echoing through the empty corridors, rising like prayer, turned backward. The rain returned 2 nights after the preacher's visit. It came without thunder this time, just a steady whisper that softened every sound the house wanted to forget. In the attic above the nursery, a locked door waited. Few knew what lay behind it. Those who did pretended not to. But Inez, the housekeeper, had tended this home too long to pretend anymore. She climbed the narrow stairs, candle trembling in her hand. The smell reached her first, sweet and heavy, the scent of linen left too long in summer heat. She turned the key she wasn't supposed to have. Inside, the window had been nailed shut. A single chair stood beside the bed. On the mattress lay the body of Nathaniel Caldwell, pale and still, wrapped in a thin sheet that had once been white. His small hand, now stiff, still clutched a wooden horse. Inez covered her mouth. Tears fell silently. Someone had tried to preserve him. His hair brushed, a ribbon tied neatly at his wrist. But decay has no loyalty. The truth was eating through the silence. She knelt, whispered a prayer, and then heard a voice behind her. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here." It was Caldwell. His face looked carved from marble, untouched by light or mercy. "Sir, he's still here," she said weakly. "He won't be for long." He stepped forward, took the candle from her hand, and stared at the body without expression. "He was my blood," he said, almost to himself. "But so is the other." Inez shook her head. You can't bury him twice. Caldwell's gaze shifted toward her. No one will speak of this. Tomorrow, before dawn, the wagon will take him to the river. There's a chapel there, empty for years. That's where he'll rest. She wanted to scream, to tell him the lie had already gone too far. But the words froze inside her throat, because behind Caldwell, in the doorway, stood Samuel. He had followed the master upstairs, barefoot, unnoticed until now. The candlelight caught his face, the same eyes, the same bone structure. For a heartbeat, it looked as though the dead boy had risen. Caldwell turned and saw him. For the first time, something close to fear crossed his features. Go back to your room, he said sharply. Samuel didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the bed, on the tiny wooden horse in the dead boy's hand. That was mine, he whispered. It's his now, but he doesn't need it anymore. The master's tone hardened. Enough. He took a step towards Samuel, but the boy spoke again, voice trembling. Why does he get to stay in heaven while I stay here? Caldwell froze. The candle flickered violently, casting both their faces into shifting halves of shadow and light. Finally, he said in a voice almost tender, because you're the one who can be seen. That night, before dawn, the wagon left quietly through the back road, covered by a tarp and rain. Dr. Klein drove it himself. He didn't look at what lay inside. At the abandoned chapel by the river, he buried the child beneath the floorboards and marked the spot with nothing more than a stone. When he returned, he found Samuel waiting by the veranda, soaked from the rain. The boy asked, did he find peace? Klein hesitated, then said, he found silence. Sometimes that's all the living can give the dead. Behind them, the first light of morning touched the Caldwell fields. It shone on two sets of footprints, one large, one small, disappearing into the mud. Winter arrived late that year, soft and colorless. The Caldwell house smelled of oil paint and turpentine. An artist from New Orleans had been invited, a quiet man with tired eyes, known for painting the kind of portraits that outlived their subjects. He arrived one morning with a wooden chest full of brushes and a promise. When I leave, you'll be eternal. Caldwell met him at the door. Paint us as we are, he said. But of course, that was the one thing the artist could never do. The family gathered in the east parlor, the grandest room of the house. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, scattering gold dust over velvet curtains. Mrs. Caldwell sat straight-backed in her mourning grey. Her husband stood behind her, hand resting on her shoulder, and between them sat Samuel, the new Nathaniel, dressed in white linen, eyes bright, posture perfect. The artist worked in silence for days. Each afternoon, Samuel held still for hours, learning to breathe like someone else's memory. Sometimes, when the painter dipped his brush, he glanced at the boy and frowned, as if the face kept changing under the light. Hold still, he murmured once. You look like two people at once. Every seventh sighed. Samuel didn't respond. His reflection in the silver mirror across the room smiled when he did not. At night, when everyone slept, the artist stayed behind to clean his brushes. He noticed small things, the thin scratches on the window glass, shaped like initials, two letters, N and S, carved side by side. He thought of asking about them, but the air of that house discouraged questions. On the fifth day, the portrait was finished. The family gathered for the unveiling. The sheet came down with a sigh. Gasps followed. There they were, Caldwell, Eleanor, and their son, captured forever in oil and varnish. But something was wrong. The light on the canvas fell unevenly. Samuel's painted eyes seemed older than his years, watchful, knowing. And if you looked closely, beneath the first layer of paint, you could almost see another face, faintly outlined beneath his, the ghost of the child he had replaced. Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth. It's beautiful, she whispered, though her voice shook. Caldwell smiled thinly. It will hang in the main hall. When the artist departed that evening, he refused payment. Some faces, he said quietly, should never be remembered so clearly. That night, the portrait was hung above the grand staircase. Every candle in the hallway seemed to bend toward it, as if drawn by something unseen. Samuel passed by it on his way to bed. He paused, staring up at the painted boy, who now carried his name. The figure looked back, half in light, half in shadow. You're not me, Samuel whispered. The painted lips did not move, but in the flicker of the candlelight, The shadow along the mouth deepened, almost into a smile. From that night on, servants swore they could hear footsteps near the staircase after midnight, and the sound of a child's voice saying softly, "Stay still. He'll notice." By spring, the Caldwell Plantation was a masterpiece of silence again. But silence is never empty. It hums, it listens, and sometimes it answers back. In the fields, the workers began speaking of omens. They said the crows no longer landed near the house, that when the wind blew from the river, it carried the faint sound of a child's laughter. One woman swore she saw two boys walking side by side near the cane rows at dawn, one in linen, one barefoot, and that when she called out, both turned to look at her with the same eyes. The overseers called it nonsense, superstition. But superstition spreads faster than orders. By the time summer came, the story had changed shape. Now they said the master's son had died, but his spirit, reborn in the body of a slave child, had come back to judge them all. Some called him the white ghost, others the boy with two souls. To the enslaved, he was neither ghost nor child. He was proof that blood could lie. In the quarters at night, songs began low, rhythmic chants carrying through the humid air. One son buried, one son born. Blood divided, justice sworn. The songs frightened the overseers. Caldwell forbade gatherings after dark, posted guards by the well. But every rule he made only deepened the belief that something holy or unholy was moving beneath the surface of his fields. Samuel heard the songs from his window. He didn't understand the words at first, but he felt them in his bones. When he asked Inez what they meant, she hesitated. "It means they see something in you, child." "What?" "A reflection of everything they've lost." He didn't reply, but that night he slipped from his room and walked barefoot into the fields. The moonlight fell over the cane, silvering every blade. From somewhere far off came the murmur of voices the slaves gathered near the old well, their faces half lit by lanterns. When they saw him, they fell silent. Then an old man stepped forward and said softly, "We know who you are." Samuel tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The man pointed toward the house. "He may own the name, but you carry the blood." One woman began humming the new song. Others joined, slow and deep. Samuel stood there, motionless, as their voices wrapped around him, gentle, reverent, terrifying. By dawn, he was back in his bed. Caldwell entered without knocking. His face was pale, his eyes red with sleepless rage. "You went to them," he said. Samuel didn't deny it. "They called me a ghost." "You are no ghost," Caldwell hissed. "You're my son. Then why do you hide me?" The master struck the table with his hand, the sound sharp as a pistol crack. "Because the world wouldn't understand." Samuel met his gaze, unflinching. "Then maybe it's the world that's wrong." Caldwell stared at him for a long time, something breaking behind his calm. Then he turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. That night, the guards reported strange movement by the cane fields, lanterns swaying, distant singing. By morning, 3 tool sheds were burned to the ground. No one claimed to know who did it, but the word revolt began to echo through the parish like the beat of a slow drum. It began with the smell, not smoke before smoke. That faint, metallic tang the air takes on when something is about to burn. The dogs barked first. Then came the bell, then the shouting. By the time Caldwell reached the veranda, the sky above the cane fields glowed orange. The fire moved fast, leaping from shed to shed, like it had been waiting for years. Flames clawed through the dry stalks, devouring the season's crop in a single breath. And through the roar of wind and cracking timber came the sound of voices, hundreds, singing in rhythm, the same forbidden song that had haunted the nights. One son buried, one son born. Blood divided, justice sworn. Caldwell shouted for his men. The overseers ran with buckets, rifles, curses. But water turned to steam before it reached the flames. He looked toward the mansion and froze. On the balcony stood Samuel, haloed by the reflection of fire. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't running. He was watching. The boy's face glowed in the shifting light. Half saint, half sinner, the locket gleaming at his throat. Behind him, Mrs. Caldwell sobbed into her hands. "Robert, please, bring him inside." But Caldwell didn't move. For the first time in his life, he didn't know which child he was saving. Dr. Klein arrived from town. drawn by the glow. His carriage stopped at the gate. He could already feel the heat. He saw chaos slaves fleeing, others fighting the flames with bare hands, overseers shouting orders no one obeyed. Inside the house, mirrors cracked from the heat. The portrait above the staircase began to darken, its varnish bubbling like skin. Samuel turned from the balcony and walked inside, calm as sleep. He stopped before the portrait. The painted eyes seemed alive in the flickering light. Two faces merged, struggling to separate again. He reached up and touched the canvas. The paint was warm, almost pulsing. Behind him, Caldwell's voice thundered. "Get away from there." Samuel didn't turn. "You said I was your son," he said quietly. "Then why am I the one who burns?" The master crossed the hall, but before he could reach the boy, the oil lamps shattered from the heat. Fire spilled down the walls like liquid gold. Caldwell grabbed Samuel's arm, pulling him toward the door. "We're leaving." "And him?" Samuel pointed upward, toward the attic. "The one you buried." Caldwell froze. The boy's words struck like a blade. He looked up the staircase, the path to the locked door, to everything he had buried. A beam fell from the ceiling. The portrait tore in two, splitting down the center, one face in shadow, one in flame. The fire roared through the hall, erasing distinctions, erasing names. Caldwell turned to the doctor, shouting over the noise. "Take him!" Klein grabbed Samuel, dragging him outside as the roof caved in. They stumbled into the yard, coughing, blinded by ash. Behind them, the Caldwell mansion collapsed inward, flames devouring its own reflection in the windows. The song still echoed from the fields, rising with the heat. And as the house fell, a gust of wind carried through the smoke, a sound that was almost laughter. Two voices, overlapping, indistinguishable. By dawn, the plantation was a skeleton of black timbers and smoke. The portrait was gone. The master was gone. But near the riverbank, footprints led away small ones, barefoot, headed east. The fire burned for 2 days. When it finally died, what remained of Caldwell Plantation was a landscape of bones, charred beams, the skeletons of staircases, a few blackened trees still standing like mourners too stubborn to fall. Dr. Klein returned with men from town to search for survivors. They found none in the main house, only heat, soot, and silence. By the 3rd day, the smell had changed from smoke to something colder, older, like the breath of a wound healing wrong. In the rubble near what had once been the study, they uncovered a small iron box, warped from the heat but unbroken. Inside, wrapped in scorched linen, lay a letter addressed in the master's unmistakable hand. "To whoever finds this, know that this house was built not on land, but on names. I have spent a lifetime confusing one for the other." The ink had bled, the sentences fractured, but Klein read on. "There were 2 sons, one born from my vows, one from my sin. The world demanded I choose between them, and I chose wrong. I tried to bury my shame under another's name, but fire has no allegiance. It burns what you love, and what you hide the same." The final line was almost illegible. The paper half melted into the linen. "If there is mercy beyond this world, let it fall not on me, but on the one who still carries my eyes." Klein folded the letter carefully, his hands trembling. He looked toward the river where Samuel had fled. In the reflection of the water, the smoke still rose behind him like ghosts ascending. That night, while the others slept, he returned alone to the ruins. The moonlight made the ashes silver, almost beautiful. There, in the spot where the portrait once hung, he found something half buried, a small silver locket, blackened but intact. Inside was the miniature painting of Eleanor and her son. Only now the image had blurred. The faces melted together into one indistinguishable blur, as if the heat itself had refused to choose. Klein closed it and whispered, "Rest, both of you." Then he buried the locket in the soil where the front door once stood. Far from the ruins, by the riverbank, Samuel awoke to the sound of frogs and wind. His clothes were torn, his skin streaked with soot, his eyes bright and hollow. He reached into his pocket and found something small, a folded scrap of parchment he didn't remember taking. On it, in his father's handwriting, only 5 words remained unburned. "You are my truth now." Samuel sat there until the sun rose. The reflection of dawn shimmered on the water. And for the first time, he didn't look away. 70 years later, In the autumn of 1912, the river rose again. The Street Landry Parish Gazette recorded the event in 3 dry sentences. Heavy flooding in the lower parishes exposed the remnants of an antebellum estate believed to be the Caldwell Plantation. Artifacts retrieved will be sent to Baton Rouge for archival examination. That was all the world knew, but in the weeks that followed, a team of archivists and laborers worked through the mud, lifting out fragments of glass, charred brick, rusted locks, each piece another letter in a language time had tried to forget. Among them was Miss Clara Duval, a young historian from New Orleans. On the 3rd day of excavation, she unearthed a small, rusted tin box near what had once been the foundation of the great staircase. It was sealed tight, the metal fused with ash. When she pried it open, she found something wrapped in oilcloth. A glass plate photograph, remarkably intact. 2 boys stood side by side before the mansion, one in linen, one barefoot. Same face, same eyes, same faint scar beneath the left eye. One stood in the light, the other half in shadow. At first, Clara thought it was a double exposure, a trick of the old camera. But the longer she looked, the less certain she became. There was something intentional about the framing, something almost ceremonial. Behind them, in the corner of the image, a faint blur of smoke rose from the fields, like a memory trapped in silver. She turned the plate over and found, scratched into the glass in a shaky hand, 5 words. "You are my truth now." Clara's breath caught. She showed it to her supervisor, who dismissed it as coincidence. "Old photographers wrote strange things," he said. "Probably poetic nonsense, and especially paper. Intended." But Clara couldn't let it go. That night, in her small hotel room, she held the plate up to the lamplight. The boys' faces shimmered for a moment as if alive. And though she knew it was impossible, she swore she saw the one in the shadows lift his head slightly, looking not at the camera, but at her. The next morning, she returned to the site. The river had receded, leaving a trail of silt and broken roots. Near the waterline, she found something glinting in the mud. A small silver locket, half melted, engraved with 2 initials, R.C. She cleaned it carefully, placed it in the evidence crate, and wrote in her notes, "Artifact #47B. Locket recovered near Northern Embankment. Possible link to subject of photograph. Condition: scarred, but intact." That was all. No one asked about the photograph again. It was stored in the archives, misfiled under Unidentified Families, 19th century Louisiana. Decades later, when the image was digitized, a technician noted an anomaly. The exposure showed 2 identical figures, but when light passed through the plate from different angles, only one cast a shadow. Time doesn't erase secrets. It buries them beneath prettier words. The Caldwell Plantation no longer appears on any map. The fields are gone. The river has shifted course, and the soil that once fed generations now feeds only wild grass. But sometimes, when the wind rises through those empty acres, it carries a sound like 2 children laughing. Historians catalogue stories. They chase facts. They call it preservation. But the truth, real truth, doesn't live in ink or archives. It breathes in the gaps, in what was never written down. The story of Robert Caldwell and the 2 boys became a footnote, a curiosity in local lore. Visitors say the family portrait survived somewhere, that it hangs now in a courthouse hallway, its paint darkened to near black. If you stand in front of it long enough, they say, you'll see a faint shimmer where a second child used to be, a suggestion of another face, erased but not forgotten. As for Samuel, no record names him, no census, no grave, only a few scattered references, an unnamed servant freed after the fire, a field hand who could read, a man who disappeared upriver. Maybe he lived a long life. Maybe he vanished as quietly as he arrived. But his father's words endured, carved into glass, carried by a photograph that refused to die. "You are my truth now." Truth. It changes shape. It changes names. It survives the people who tried to own it. Maybe that's the only kind worth remembering. If you ever travel through southern Louisiana and the fog rolls low across the river, stop for a moment. Listen. You might hear it, the faint snap of fire, the echo of footsteps through wet cane, a child's voice asking, "If I forget who I am, will it hurt?" No one answers. Because some questions were never meant to be solved, only told, again and again, until the story itself becomes the memory. And somewhere, under layers of ash and time, two faces still wait for morning, one born free, one born forgotten, and both, forever, the same.